The autumn wind carried secrets through the tobacco fields of Millbrook Plantation in 1782. Among those secrets was the sound of a woman's breathing, shallow and desperate, as she pressed her newborn son against her chest. Sarah had waited 18 years for this moment. Tonight, under a moon that seemed to understand her pain, she would either find freedom or die trying. The floorboards of the slave quarters creaked beneath her bare feet as she moved like a ghost through the darkness. Every step was calculated, every breath measured. She had memorized the rhythm of the night guards, counted their footsteps for months, studied their patterns like a scholar studies scripture. But tonight felt different. Tonight, the very air seemed to pulse with the weight of destiny. 3 days had passed since Joshua's birth. 3 days of watching him sleep in a wooden box that served as his cradle. 3 days of knowing that any moment could be their last together. Master Whitmore had a reputation for selling infants early, before bonds could form between mother and child. He called it good business practice. Sarah called it the cruelest form of torture imaginable. Her son, barely 3 days old, stirred against her breast. She had named him Joshua in her heart, though she had whispered no name aloud. Names were dangerous things for people like her. Names implied futures, and slaves weren't supposed to dream of futures. Yet as she looked down at his tiny face, she saw something that made her soul catch fire. He had her grandmother's eyes, the same eyes that had once looked upon African shores. The memory struck her like lightning. Her grandmother, Kemi, had told her stories before the fever took her. Stories of a land where children belonged to their mothers, where families weren't property to be bought and sold like cattle. Sarah had been 7 then, young enough to believe in impossible things. Now, at 25, holding her own child, those impossible things suddenly seemed within reach. She had spent 3 months planning this escape, ever since she realized the master's son had left more than just bruises on her body. When her belly began to swell, she knew her time was running out. Pregnant slaves were valuable, but newborns were leverage. Master Whitmore would sell her child as soon as he could walk, just as he had sold her own brother when Sarah was 12. The night Joshua was born, Sarah made a promise that burned in her chest like molten steel. Her son would never know the sting of a whip, never bow his head to call another man master, never watch his children disappear into wagons bound for distant plantations. This promise was her North Star, her religion, her reason for breathing. Outside, the October air bit through her thin cotton dress, but she barely noticed. Fear had a way of making the body forget cold. She clutched the small bundle of supplies she had hidden behind the chicken coop. A knife stolen from the kitchen, dried corn wrapped in cloth, and a compass she had found in the master's study during one of her cleaning duties. She had learned to read that compass by watching young Master Thomas practice his navigation lessons. The irony wasn't lost on her. The same education they used to navigate their ships that had brought her ancestors in chains, would now guide her to freedom. Sarah moved through the vegetable garden where she had worked countless hours under the scorching sun. Her hands knew every plant, every stone, every shadow. But tonight, these familiar surroundings felt like a foreign country. Everything looked different when viewed through the lens of escape, when every shadow could hide a threat or offer salvation. The first challenge came sooner than expected. As she approached the edge of the plantation grounds, she heard voices. 2 of the night guards were sharing tobacco and stories just 50 yards from her planned route. Her heart hammered against her ribs so hard she feared it might wake Joshua. She crouched behind a wagon, pressing her face against the rough wood, tasting the salt of her own desperate sweat. "Strange night," one guard said, his voice carrying on the wind. "Feel like something's stirring, like the very air's got secrets." Sarah closed her eyes and willed herself to become invisible. She had learned this trick as a child, this ability to make herself so still, so small, that people forgot she existed. It had saved her from countless beatings over the years. Tonight, it might save her life. Minutes felt like hours before the guards moved on. When their voices finally faded, Sarah emerged from her hiding place with legs that trembled like newborn foal. But there was no time for fear. Dawn was still hours away, but she needed every minute. The Underground Railroad conductor had been clear: be at Miller's Creek by sunrise, or don't come at all. The woods beyond the plantation were a different kind of darkness, thick and alive, with sounds Sarah couldn't identify. City-born slaves often feared the wilderness, but Sarah had grown up on stories of her ancestors who knew every tree as a friend, every stream as a highway to freedom. She let instinct guide her feet along game trails that seemed to appear in the moonlight just when she needed them. Joshua stirred again, making small sounds that seemed to echo through the forest like thunderclaps. Sarah began to hum, a melody her grandmother had taught her, a song that supposedly came from the homeland across the ocean. The baby quieted, as if he recognized something ancient and true in those notes. 2 hours into their journey, disaster struck. Sarah heard dogs barking in the distance, their voices carrying the unmistakable note of pursuit. Master Whitmore had discovered her absence. Her blood turned to ice water as she realized the full weight of what she had done. Escaped slaves were branded, beaten, sometimes killed as examples to others. Mothers who fled with their children faced even worse fates. But she couldn't turn back. Forward was the only direction that made sense now. Sarah increased her pace, following a stream that she hoped would mask their scent. The water was shockingly cold against her ankles, but she pressed on, carrying Joshua above the waterline while stones bruised her feet. Behind them, the barking grew closer. The dogs had found her trail. Panic threatened to overwhelm her when she remembered something her grandmother had told her. When the world tries to break you, child, remember that you carry the strength of every woman who came before you. We are not victims of history. We are the authors of our own stories. Those words became her prayer as she pushed deeper into the wilderness. The moon, now directly overhead, seemed to light a path through the trees. Sarah began to believe that Kemi was somehow guiding her steps, that the spirits of her ancestors were walking beside her in the darkness. The barking suddenly stopped. Sarah froze, listening to the silence that felt more ominous than any sound. Had they lost the trail, or were they closer than she thought? She waited, holding her breath, feeling Joshua's tiny heartbeat against her chest like a drum counting down to either salvation or capture. Then she heard something that made her soul sing, the sound of rushing water. Miller's Creek was close. The conductor had told her to listen for the waterfall, to follow its sound to the hidden cave where others waited for passage north. Freedom was so close she could almost taste it. But as she emerged from a thicket of brambles, she came face to face with something that stopped her heart. Master Whitmore himself, sitting on horseback not 20 feet away, his rifle pointed directly at her chest. "Did you really think you could steal my property, Sarah?" His voice was calm, which somehow made it more terrifying. "That baby represents a significant investment. I can't allow you to simply walk away with him." Sarah's mind raced. She had come too far to surrender now. Joshua deserved better than a life in chains, better than the brutality she had endured. In that moment, she made a decision that surprised even her. "He's not your property," she said, her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. "He's my son, and I'd rather see him dead than live as your slave." It was a bluff, but something in her eyes must have convinced Whitmore that she meant it. His finger hesitated on the trigger. "You think freedom is worth dying for?" he asked. "No," Sarah replied, stepping backward toward the sound of rushing water. "I think freedom is worth living for." What happened next would haunt and inspire Sarah for the rest of her life. As Whitmore raised his rifle, a shot rang out through the forest. But it wasn't his finger that pulled the trigger. From the shadows emerged a figure Sarah had never expected to see. Thomas, the master's own son, holding a smoking pistol. "I can't let you do this, Father," Thomas said, his voice breaking. "Not to her, not to the child." The young man who had violated Sarah, who had been the cause of her pregnancy and desperation, had somehow become her salvation. The complexity of the moment was almost too much to bear. Hatred and gratitude warred in her chest as Master Whitmore fell from his horse, clutching his shoulder. "Run!" Thomas whispered to Sarah. "The others are coming. This is your only chance." Sarah didn't wait to understand his motivations or question this unexpected mercy. She ran toward the sound of the waterfall, crashing through underbrush with Joshua clutched against her heart. Behind her, she heard Thomas shouting to the approaching dogs and men, sending them in the wrong direction. At Miller's Creek, she found what she had been promised, a hidden cave behind the waterfall, and inside it, 3 other escaped slaves and a white woman with kind eyes who introduced herself simply as friend. "Welcome to your first day of freedom," the conductor said, wrapping Sarah and Joshua in warm blankets. "The journey north will be dangerous, but you've already proven you have the courage to make it." As Sarah sat in that cave, listening to the water cascade over the rocks, she finally allowed herself to believe that the impossible had become possible. Joshua slept peacefully in her arms, unaware that he had just become the first free member of his family in generations. The journey to Canada took 3 months. Moving from safe house to safe house, hiding in barns and basements, walking through forests and fields under cover of darkness. There were close calls, moments when capture seemed certain, times when Sarah wondered if she had the strength to continue, but every time she looked at Joshua's face, she found new reservoirs of determination. They reached Toronto on a snowy January morning in 1783. Sarah had never seen snow before, but as the white crystals fell around them, she thought they looked like freedom made visible. She found work as a seamstress, rented a small room above a bakery, and began the slow process of building a life where her son's future belonged to him alone. Years later, when Joshua was old enough to understand, Sarah would tell him the story of his first journey. She would describe the moonlit night when they fled the plantation, the dogs that chased them, the unexpected mercy that saved them, and the waterfall that marked their passage from slavery to freedom. But she would also tell him something else, that freedom wasn't just about escaping chains, it was about choosing every day to believe that your life has value, that your dreams matter, that your children deserve a world better than the one you inherited. Joshua grew up to become a teacher, then a minister, then a leader in the abolitionist movement. He never forgot the debt he owed to the courage of the woman who carried him to freedom on that moonlit night in October. And when he had children of his own, he made sure they knew the story of their grandmother Sarah, the woman who decided that some things are worth any risk. Sarah lived to be 87, long enough to see the end of slavery in America, long enough to hold great-grandchildren who were born free and never questioned their right to be. On her deathbed, surrounded by the family she had made possible through one night of desperate courage, her last words were a whisper of gratitude to her grandmother Kemi and all the ancestors who had given her strength when she needed it most. The moonlight that guided Sarah to freedom still shines over the fields where Millbrook Plantation once stood. The buildings are gone now, but the land remembers. Sometimes on October nights when the wind is just right, locals say you can still hear the echo of a lullaby carried on the breeze, the song of a mother who loved her child enough to risk everything for his future. This is more than just a story about escape from slavery. It's a testament to the power of a mother's love, the strength of human courage, and the truth that freedom is never given. It must be seized by those brave enough to claim it. Sarah's journey reminds us that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they decide that hope is stronger than fear, that love is more powerful than oppression, and that the future is worth fighting for. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the strength we all carry within us, then help us share more stories like this. Subscribe to Top Life Stories and join a community that believes in the power of human courage to change the world. Because every time we remember stories like Sarah's, we honor the sacrifices of those who came before us and inspire ourselves to be braver in our own struggles for justice and freedom. Hit that subscribe button, share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and remember, you carry the strength of every person who fought for your right to dream. Use it wisely.